The first thing Aaliyah noticed was the color of the water. It wasn't just blue, it was unreal, a shimmering blend of turquoise and glass, stretching endlessly beyond the horizon. Standing on the balcony of their private villa in Montego Bay, she felt like she had finally stepped into the life she had imagined for herself. This was supposed to be the beginning. At 26, Aaliyah Brown had just married Daniel Clark, a man who, on paper, was everything she could have asked for. Stable, successful, reserved but dependable. Their wedding in London had been elegant but rushed, squeezed between Daniel's endless business commitments. The honeymoon had been delayed for months. Until now. Worth the wait, isn't it? Daniel said, stepping beside her with a drink in hand. Aaliyah smiled, leaning slightly into him. It's perfect. But even as she said it, her eyes drifted, not to the ocean, but to the reflection in the glass door behind them. A third figure stood inside the villa. Richard Clark, Daniel's father. The trip hadn't just been a honeymoon. Not really. It had come up casually, almost too casually. Dad's been having a hard time since Mum passed, Daniel had said one evening. I don't want to leave him alone right now. He could come with us, separate room, of course. You won't even notice. Aaliyah remembered hesitating. It wasn't what she had imagined. Honeymoons were supposed to be private, intimate, a time to build something new. But she didn't want to start her marriage with conflict. So she agreed. I won't even notice. That's what Daniel had said. But as Aaliyah turned back from the balcony and saw Richard watching her, smiling, glass of whiskey in hand, she realized something uncomfortable. She had already noticed. Richard Clark was not what she expected. He wasn't fragile or withdrawn like a grieving widower. He was sharp, confident, the kind of man who carried himself like he still controlled every room he entered. And he watched people, especially her. Beautiful view, isn't it? Richard said, stepping forward. Aaliyah nodded politely. It really is. He didn't look at the ocean when he answered. Some views are harder to ignore than others. There was a pause just a second too long. Aaliyah forced a small smile and turned away. Maybe she was overthinking it. Maybe this trip just needed time to settle. The first day passed in a blur of sunshine and staged happiness. They walked along the beach, toes sinking into warm sand. They laughed over lunch at a seaside restaurant. Daniel took photos, lots of them, but always seemed slightly distracted, checking his phone when he thought no one was looking. Richard, on the other hand, was fully present. Too present. He asked Aaliyah questions about her childhood, her dreams, the things she wanted from life. Things Daniel had never really asked. At first, it felt harmless, even comforting, but there was something beneath it, something she couldn't quite name. That night, after dinner, Daniel announced he needed to step out. Just a quick meeting, he said, already grabbing his keys. Won't be long. Aaliyah watched him leave, a familiar disappointment settling in her chest. Alone again. Except she wasn't. She turned back into the villa. Richard was sitting on the couch, pouring another drink. Looks like it's just us, he said. His tone was light, but something about it made the room feel smaller. Outside, the waves crashed rhythmically against the shore. Inside, the silence stretched. Aaliyah sat across from him, keeping a careful distance. This place is beautiful, she said, trying to fill the gap. Richard nodded slowly. It is. He took a sip, then added, almost casually. But it's not the place that makes a trip memorable. Aaliyah frowned slightly. What does? Richard looked directly at her. The people you share it with. In that moment, something shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. A small, quiet shift that would later feel like the first crack in something that was never meant to break. Aaliyah would remember that night for years to come. Not because anything happened, but because of what almost did. And because, deep down, she realized something she didn't want to admit. This trip wasn't going to be what she expected. Not even close. Morning came softly over Montego Bay. Golden sunlight slipped through the curtains, spilling across the bed where Aaliyah lay awake. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the night before, The silence, the tension, the way Richard had looked at her. Not inappropriate. Not exactly. But not right either. Beside her, Daniel's side of the bed was empty. Again. She found him outside on the terrace, already dressed, phone pressed to his ear. "No, push the deal through," he was saying, pacing slowly. "I don't care what it costs, we can't delay this." Aaliyah stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. This was supposed to be their time, their beginning, but Daniel seemed to be everywhere, except with her. When he finally noticed her, he gave a quick smile. Distracted, automatic. "Morning," he said, covering the phone briefly. "I'll be done in a minute." Aaliyah nodded, but she didn't wait. Downstairs, the villa was quiet. Too quiet, until she heard the clink of glass from the kitchen. Richard. He stood at the counter, slicing fruit with calm precision, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. He looked up the moment she entered. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Aaliyah hesitated. "Just woke up early." Richard smiled faintly. "Jet lag or thoughts?" There it was again. That way he spoke. Like he was reaching past her words, looking for something deeper. She forced a small laugh. "Probably both." Breakfast was simple, but the atmosphere wasn't. Richard moved around the kitchen with ease, placing a plate in front of her. "You should eat," he said. "Long day ahead." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "We have plans." Richard leaned against the counter, watching her. "I thought you might want to explore." Daniel's busy, clearly. There was no bitterness in his tone, just observation, and somehow that made it worse. An hour later, they were walking along the shoreline, just the two of them. Aaliyah had told herself it was harmless. There was nothing wrong with spending time with her father-in-law, especially when her husband was unavailable. That's what she told herself. But as the waves brushed against her feet and the wind played with her hair, she couldn't ignore the strange feeling growing inside her. Richard walked beside her, hands in his pockets, completely at ease. "You know," he said, "Daniel's always been like this." Aaliyah glanced at him. "Like what?" "Distant." The word hung in the air. "He's driven," Richard continued, "focused. But sometimes, he forgets what's right in front of him." Aaliyah didn't respond, because a part of her agreed. They stopped near a stretch of rocks where the beach curved away from the resort. It was quieter here, more private. Richard turned to face her. "You deserve attention, Aaliyah," he said. Her chest tightened slightly. "Daniel gives me attention." Richard tilted his head, studying her expression. "Does he?" The question wasn't aggressive. It was calm, measured, and that's what made it dangerous. Aaliyah looked away, staring out at the water. She didn't want to have this conversation. Not with him, but the truth lingered, unspoken between them. Richard stepped a little closer, not enough to alarm, but enough to shift the space between them. "Loneliness doesn't always come from being alone," he said quietly. "Sometimes it comes from being with the wrong person, at the wrong time." Aaliyah felt her pulse quicken. "This isn't appropriate," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Richard didn't back away, but he didn't move closer either. He just smiled slightly. "I'm just talking." The walk back was quieter. He didn't push further, didn't cross any obvious line. But something had already changed, because now Aaliyah was aware of his presence, aware of his words, aware of the way he looked at her, not as a daughter-in-law, but as something else. That evening, Daniel returned late. Again. Drinks, apologies, promises. "I'll make it up to you," he said, kissing her forehead. Aaliyah nodded, but her mind wasn't fully there, because across the room, Richard sat in silence, watching the interaction with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not anger, not guilt, something colder, something patient. That night, as Aaliyah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a thought crept in. Uninvited, uncomfortable, but impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a vacation anymore. It was becoming something else. Something complicated. Something dangerous. And she had a feeling it was only the beginning. By the third night, the island no longer felt like paradise. The sky had been heavy all day, thick clouds gathering slowly, like something waiting to happen. The air was humid, tense. Even the ocean seemed restless, its waves louder, more aggressive against the shore. Aaliyah felt it too, that quiet pressure building inside her. Dinner was short. Daniel barely touched his food, his attention glued to his phone as usual. "I have to step out," he said again, standing up before anyone could respond. "Just for a bit." Aaliyah didn't argue this time, didn't even look surprised. She just nodded, her silence saying more than words ever could. The door closed behind him, and just like that, it was the two of them again. The storm arrived without warning. First, a crack of thunder that shook the windows. Then darkness. The lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. For a moment, the villa was swallowed in silence. Then came the rain, loud, relentless, pounding against the roof like a warning no one could ignore. "Stay there," Richard's voice cut through the dark. "I'll get candles." Aaliyah stood still, her heart beating faster than it should. This felt different, not like the previous nights. This time there was no distraction, no noise, no escape, just darkness. And him. When the candles were lit, the room transformed. Soft golden light danced across the walls, casting long shadows that moved with every flicker. It was quiet, too quiet, except for the storm raging outside. Richard placed a candle on the table between them. For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to, because everything that had been building over the past few days was now sitting in that silence. "You seem different tonight," Richard said finally. Aaliyah crossed her arms lightly. "It's just the storm." He shook his head slightly. "No, it's more than that." His voice was calm, certain, like he already knew the answer. Another crack of thunder echoed through the villa, louder this time. Instinctively, Aaliyah flinched. Without thinking, Richard stepped closer. "It's just thunder," he said softly. "I know," she replied quickly, but she didn't step away. That was the moment. Small, almost invisible, but it mattered, because neither of them created distance. "You shouldn't be alone this much," Richard said, his voice lower now. Aaliyah looked up at him. "I'm not alone, aren't you?" The question landed harder this time. Not because of what he said, but because of what she felt. The rain grew heavier, the wind howled, and inside that dimly lit room, something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, like a door being pushed open inch by inch. "I didn't plan this," Aaliyah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard studied her face. "Neither did I." Another pause, longer this time, more dangerous. What happened next wasn't loud. There was no dramatic moment, no clear point where everything changed. Just a series of choices, small ones, a step closer, a hesitation ignored, a boundary quietly crossed. Outside, the storm reached its peak. Thunder cracked through the sky. Rain flooded the earth. And inside the villa, the line that should never have been crossed disappeared. Hours later, the storm began to fade. The rain softened, the wind slowed, and the power flickered back on. Bright white light filled the room again, harsh, unforgiving, real. Aaliyah stood near the window, her back turned. She hadn't said a word. Not since. Behind her, Richard adjusted his sleeve, his expression unreadable. Neither of them knew what to say, because there was nothing that could undo it. "It shouldn't have happened," Aaliyah finally said. Her voice trembled slightly. Richard didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone was calm, controlled. "It already did. That was it. No apology, no panic, just acceptance. Cold and simple." The door opened. Daniel walked in, slightly wet from the rain, shaking droplets from his jacket. "Power's out across half the town," he said casually, not noticing the tension in the room. "You guys okay?" Aaliyah turned quickly, forcing a normal expression. "Yeah," she said. "We're fine." Richard nodded once, pouring himself another drink. Just waiting out the storm. Daniel smiled, completely unaware. Good, he said. Looks like I didn't miss anything. Aaliyah felt her chest tighten. Because in that moment, she realized something horrifying. He had missed everything. Later that night, lying beside her husband, Aaliyah stared into the darkness. The storm was gone, but inside her, something far worse had begun. And deep down she knew this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was the beginning of something she might not be able to stop. Morning came like nothing had happened. The sky was clear again. The ocean had returned to its calm, postcard beauty. Sunlight filled the villa, warm and innocent, almost mocking what the night had hidden. Aaliyah stood in front of the mirror, staring at herself. She looked the same, but she didn't feel the same. Breakfast. Daniel's voice came from behind her. She flinched slightly before turning around. Yeah, I'll be there. He smiled, completely unaware, and walked out. That was the hardest part. Not the guilt, not the confusion, but the normalcy. Downstairs, everything felt staged. Daniel scrolled through his phone while eating. Richard read the newspaper, sipping coffee like any other morning. No tension, no acknowledgement, no sign that anything had changed. Except it had. Aaliyah felt it in every glance she avoided, and every glance she accidentally met. At one point, her eyes lifted and met Richard's, just for a second. But it was enough, because there was no confusion in his expression. No regret, just quiet awareness, as if he was waiting. I've got a call, Daniel said, standing up mid-meal. Might head into town again. Aaliyah didn't respond immediately. Then softly, again. Daniel paused, slightly annoyed. It's important, Aaliyah. This trip isn't just a vacation for me. There it was. The divide. Clearer than ever. I'll stay back, she said finally. Daniel nodded. Good. Relax. Enjoy yourself. He kissed her lightly and left. The door shut. And once again, silence. You're overthinking. Richard's voice came from across the room. Aaliyah didn't look at him. I'm not thinking about anything. He chuckled softly. That's not true. She stood up quickly. It was a mistake. Richard folded his newspaper calmly. Was it? That question hit differently this time, because now it had weight. Aaliyah turned to face him. It shouldn't have happened. And yet, he said, standing slowly. You haven't told him. Her breath caught. He stepped closer, not aggressively, not forcefully, but with a confidence that made it hard to move. That tells me everything I need to know. That's not fair, she said, her voice tightening. You don't get to twist this. I'm not twisting anything, Richard replied calmly. I'm just being honest. He stopped a few steps away from her. You felt something, he continued. And you still do. Aaliyah shook her head. No, but it didn't sound convincing. Not even to her. The days that followed blurred together. Moments turned into patterns. Patterns turned into something harder to escape. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It was the small things. Conversations that lasted too long. Glances that lingered. Excuses that became easier to make. And Daniel, he remained distant, unaware, absent even when he was physically there. Richard, on the other hand, was always present. Always watching. Always knowing exactly what to say. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve more than this. The words settled into Aaliyah's mind like seeds. And slowly, they began to grow. One afternoon, they found themselves back on the quieter part of the beach. The same place as before. Only now it didn't feel accidental. Felt chosen. This doesn't feel like a mistake anymore, Richard said quietly. Aaliyah didn't respond, because she didn't know how to. You can keep pretending, he continued. Or you can admit the truth. She looked at him, her expression conflicted. And what truth is that? Richard held her gaze. That this didn't just happen once. The weight of that sentence hung heavy in the air. Because deep down, she knew he was right. That night, Aaliyah sat alone on the balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of her, calm and silent. But inside her, everything was loud, messy, out of control. She had come here for a new beginning, a fresh start, a life with her husband. Instead, she was living a secret she couldn't undo, a secret that was growing stronger with every passing day. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet fear began to take shape. This wasn't going to end quietly. Couldn't. Because secrets like this, they don't stay buried. It started with a delay, then another. Aaliyah stood in the bathroom, staring at the test in her trembling hands. Positive. Her heart dropped, because deep down, she already knew. The timing didn't lie, couldn't be Daniel's, which meant only one thing. Later that night, she told Richard. Silence filled the room. Then he exhaled slowly. Get rid of it. The words were cold, immediate. Aaliyah shook her head. No. His expression hardened. You don't understand what this will do. For the first time, she saw something different in him. Not charm. Not control. Fear. This isn't just a mistake anymore, she whispered. It's bigger than that. Richard stepped closer, voice low and firm. Then fix it, before it destroys everything. But Aaliyah knew one thing now. There was no fixing this. Only consequences. The truth didn't stay hidden for long. One evening, Daniel saw the message. A name. A sentence. Enough. Everything exploded. What is this? He shouted, phone shaking in his hand. Aaliyah froze. Richard stayed silent. The argument turned violent fast. Accusations. Betrayal. Rage. Daniel lunged at his father. Furniture crashed. Glass shattered. And in the chaos, something irreversible happened. When it ended, the room was silent. Too silent. Daniel lay on the floor, unmoving. Aaliyah stood frozen, hands shaking. Richard leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Blood everywhere. Nothing would ever be the same again. Police arrived within minutes. 3 people. 3 different stories. Richard claimed self-defense. Aaliyah said it was an accident. But the evidence told a darker story. Signs of struggle. Multiple impacts. No clear truth. Investigators quickly realized this wasn't just a fight. It was the result of something deeper. Something hidden. And that secret didn't stay buried for long. The headlines spread fast. A forbidden affair. Pregnancy. A dead husband. Aaliyah became the center of it all. Not just a witness, but part of the reason everything collapsed. Richard faced serious charges. His calm demeanor now gone, replaced with desperation. And the child, an innocent life tied to a tragedy it never chose. When did this truly begin? Was it the storm? The loneliness? The first conversation? Or the moment Aaliyah chose silence instead of truth? Because sometimes, tragedy doesn't start with violence. It starts with a single decision. A small step. A line quietly crossed. And once it is, there's no going back.